Welcome to Basic Brewing Radio for Thursday, February 1st, 2007. I'm James Spencer. Here at Basic Brewing Radio, we're all about home brewing. Well, this week, David Myers of Redstone Meadery joins us to talk about the International Mead Festival coming up in Denver, Colorado. And while we've got him on the line, we'll also get advice from David on the design of our next multi-batch mead experiment. Well, it's been a fun week so far, he said sarcastically. I went out of town this past weekend and my laptop crashed, so I appreciate your continued patience on the email responses. Also, I'm taking a little medication today, so I may be a little squirrely. Let's just say that shingles are better on your roof than on your body. Now, I always like to find offbeat things in the mailbag, and here's one from Kevin in Raleigh, North Carolina. Kevin wrote about brewing up some beer for dogs. He quotes an article that he found on the subject. The article says, Jamie, who's the person who is making beer commercially for dogs, Jamie eventually came up with a formula very similar to beer, but without alcohol, carbonation, or hops, which can cause dog seizures. The final recipe consists of water, malted barley, glucosamine, vitamin E, and lactic acid. Natural beef drippings provide additional flavor, and sodium benzoate prevents bottle fermenting. Well, Kevin writes, my question is regarding the addition of, when to add, the vitamin supplements and the sodium benzoate. I'm not sure if the vitamins would be added during the boil or after cooling the wort. Based on what I have found, the sodium benzoate would be added just before bottling. Kevin says, my wife likes this idea, so I'm trying to figure out the best way to brew this beer. It would seem to me that I would boil the malt extract along with the beef extract or other beef additive and then cool the wort. Then I would add 1 crushed tablet per gallon of wort of sodium benzoate and the crushed vitamin supplements to the cooled wort. Stir until dissolved, then bottle directly from the boil kettle. Do you have any ideas or thoughts on this? Well, Kevin, I think your method sounds just fine. Just boiling the malt extract and the beef extract for 15 minutes would theoretically sterilize it, and then adding the sodium benzoate and vitamins after cooling sounds good too. But, I've never done this before, so I'm open to suggestions from listeners out there. I've heard and read a few references to the beer for dogs craze lately. I don't know if it's technically beer since it's not fermented, and you definitely want to leave the hops out. Hops, I've read, are very bad for dogs, so keep them away from your kettle tube as well if it's got hops in it. Now, what do you think? If you've made beer for your dogs, let me know what you do, and I'll pass it on to everybody else. Al from Poughkeepsie, New York, writes in. He says, I have an extract question. What is the proper, quote-unquote, or recommended way to steep your grains? I like the more common method of using a grain bag. When I went to my local shop looking for grain bags, the owner told me steeping in bags was the old-school method. That most people today are steeping the grains directly in water, straining the grains into a separate pot, then re-pouring the liquid through the grains. Are there any benefits to steeping without the bag? Well, Al, it would seem to me that following that no-bag method would benefit you in that it would give you more exercise on brew day. It seems a lot of work to me to do all that pouring and repouring, especially when I've gotten great results for more than a decade using the grain bags. I think as long as your bag is big enough to get good circulation through it and you move the bag through the water every now and then, I think you'll get great results in steeping using a bag. But I'm always open to suggestions and discussion. So if you're on the other side of the fence, the no grain bag side, just let me know and I'll pass on your comments to everybody else. You could always get one of those huge grain bags that's as big or bigger than your brew pot, and steep your grains with that. That way your grains are floating around there free, just as loose as there were no bag at all. And then when it's time to remove them, just gather up the bag and pull everything out. So maybe there's a compromise there. Greg from Muncie wrote in to say, in recent episodes, you and your guests have talked a bit about the reasons people homebrew. I'd like to add one more motivation that I've not heard much about on your show, organic brewing. Aside from regional breweries and a few imports like Pincus and Samuel Smith, it's difficult to find organic beers, particularly if you live outside of larger metropolitan areas. And Greg says, okay, Anheuser-Busch has a few new organic brews, but I'm not going there. Come on, Greg. Just try one and see what it's like. So those of us who try to live organic, sustainable lifestyles don't have a whole lot of beer options. And importing an organic Samuel Smith from Europe seems to contradict the earth-friendly goals of drinking organic beer. So I brew my own. Greg says there's a great company in California called Seven Bridges Cooperative, and they're at breworganic.com, that supplies a wide variety of organic malts, hops, and other ingredients, and shipping some supplies from California is environmentally friendlier and cheaper than shipping heavy beer across the Atlantic. So Greg says, I've brewed a few variations of my mild ale as well as a German Hefeweizen, all organic and quite tasty. And I've got an organic Oktoberfest ready to start lagering this week. So here's to all the organic homebrewers out there. Cheers to our good beer and our good earth. I'll drink to that after I'm off my medication. I had a few folks writing in to suggest that the white powder in the 3-year-old ingredient kit we talked about last week was probably priming sugar. Well, of course it was. I don't know why I didn't think about it then. I guess it's been a while since I've brewed from a kit. I've just forgotten what's in them. Not that there's anything wrong with kits. I've brewed with a lot of good kits in my time. It's just that I'm in the stage right now where I'm playing around with different ingredients and recipes. So I'll probably move back to kits one of these days. Rick from Pacific Brew News Radio writes, looking at new brewing projects and just found an article about hops. In the article, they mention homebrewers using their mash tun as a hop back when they're brewing big beers. Have you done this? Do your listeners or contacts have any advice? He says the article says to put the wort back into the tun for 20 to 40 minutes to soak up hop flavor. What are some basic assumptions here? Obviously, the tun would need to be sanitized. Can you just dump the wort in there because it doesn't have the yeast added? Well, if you have a converted keg as a mash tun, you could run the hot wort from the kettle through the hops in the mash tun, and you wouldn't have to worry about sanitizing the mash tun, I'm assuming. Now, I use a 10-gallon plastic water cooler as my mash tun, so I'm not going to be putting boiling temperature wort in there. And it would seem to me that sanitizing a mash tun, either with a false bottom or a filter screen, would be tricky, since there are a lot of all kinds of places for the little baddies to hide in there. Now, using a mash tun as a hop back in this way, running the wort through a bunch of hops before going into the fermenter, man, it would definitely add a lot of hop flavor and aroma, and I think it's a procedure well worth chasing down. So again, if you have input on using your mash tun as a hop back, give me the details, and I'll pass them on. And imagine you would have to think about boil time and hop utilization of the hops that you put in during the boil, since if the wort is going to remain hot for 20 to 40 minutes in the hop back, that would affect the isomerization of those hops that you put in earlier on. So a lot to think about on that, and maybe worth a show on its own. Okay, let's go on to our interview. The International Mead Festival is coming up in Denver on February 9th and 10th. We got David Myers from Redstone Meadery on the line to tell us about the event and to help us in designing our next great mead experiment. Well, David Myers, welcome again to Basic Brewing Radio.
Oh, I appreciate you having me back, James.
You're getting in some of my head, David, because every time February rolls around and Valentine's Day rolls around, I'm thinking of mead.
Well, that's the hope. Of course, we want you to think of mead all the other 11 months, but with the International Mead Festival upon us, it is the time of year we want people thinking about mead.
And I thought that last year it was going to be every other year. Am I just misremembering?
You probably heard that idea being kicked around, and it always is getting kicked around about making it a 2-year festival instead of an every-year festival, and I think that's always a possibility in the end, but we've yet to make the decision to take it to an every other year format.
Well, it's good. I mean, if you can keep up the response and get good mead makers in, why not have it every year?
Absolutely.
Well, tell us about the event.
Well, it is the 5th International Mead Festival, 4th one to be held actually in Colorado. The original one was in Chicago, and this year, once again, we can make claim to the largest commercial mead festival anywhere in the world. There are more commercial meads to try in under our roof during February 9th and 10th than any other place that you could go and any other place you could have ever been. I believe we have 107 registered meads from 35 different producers.
Wow.
And once again, meads coming from all over the world, though, of course, a bulk of them are from the United States. We have 3 Canadian meaderies returning for the umpteenth year. The meads from South Africa. We have the Poles are coming from Poland again to present their products, as well as we have Lithuania for the first time as a country being represented.
Huh.
So we're really excited about that, as well as Denmark, actually. There are 2 countries that have never been represented before this year.
So how do you find these people?
Well, slowly but surely, they're also finding us. But as meaderies open, they're searching for information. We try to put a lot of information out there at the International Mead Festival. There are several companies along with ours. There's Julia Hers at honeywine.com and Vicky Rowe down at gotmead.com, and so these are resource bases that they're always looking for meaderies, and they get contacted by people who are opening meaderies. And so, we try to invite everybody we can possibly find. And, a great example, though, of how people can find us at times, we just got an email from a company last night going, "Hey, I just saw about the Mead Festival. Is it too late for me to get some entries in?" So it continues to grow and getting a little life of its own.
So are you going to have a competition?
We do. There is a private judging of the commercial meads that takes place during the day on Friday. And then Friday evening, February 9th, we have a session open to the public. And then again on Saturday evening, the 10th, we have a session open to the public. And we announce the winners of the commercial competition on Saturday evening. Another thing about our festival is we did have the second year of the amateur side, the home brewers, for the International Mead Festival. Last year, we felt like we just were, amazed and thrilled that we got 212 entries on year one. Well, we're even happier with 237 entries in year 2.
Wow!
And so those, the first round of the judging for the amateurs has already been completed. We'll do final round on the Thursday evening before the festival. The nice thing about our festival is we offer a final round by some of the best judges in the U.S., including a lot of commercial mead makers and people of the likes of Ken Schramm, the author of The Complete Mead Maker. And those people will be given their awards on Friday evening at the festival.
And what kind of categories are you looking at in the competition?
On the commercial side, we have a series of categories. We've also expanded some of the categories, breaking them into parts and pieces this year. But, of course, we have a braggot and a sizer. We do a dessert mead category, which is basically any mead 14% alcohol or higher. We have a metheglin, of course, with spices, the pie mint with the grapes, a specialty category that doesn't basically if you have ingredients from one or more, from 2 or more categories, you go into the specialty. This year we actually broke our melomel category. The category had gotten so strong that we actually broke it into 2 categories. There's a berry melomel and then other fruit or vegetable melomel. And also we broke our traditional category out this year. So we actually have categories for a dry traditional, a medium traditional, and a sweet traditional. And then we round it all out with a varietal category of just a single blossom honey.
Now, you ran through some terms there that if people aren't familiar with mead, they might not know what a braggot and a sizer and a melomel are. Can you give us quick definitions of those?
I'd be happy to. A braggot is actually the precursor to ale, and it's actually literally the blend of honey with malt. Sizer is actually honey with apples. It can be apples, apple juice, or apple cider. Blend it with the honeys. The methylene, as we mentioned, is honey with any herbs or spices. The piment is actually a precursor to grape wine, so it's actually honey with grapes. Specialty, as I mentioned, is only a mixture. Melomel, as a regular definition, is fruits other than grapes or apples. Blend it with honey, and then, as we said, we broke it out this year into berries or other fruit and vegetable meads. And I think that hits the categories.
Now, on the braggot, I've heard discussions in several areas of different opinions. Is there a sort of set amount of honey that you can add to, say, a beer to make it a braggot, or would any beer with honey be technically a braggot?
Well, in very technical definitions, I would probably tell you that a braggot is at least 50% honey. For the festival, because we want to be encouraging of some of the breweries that are working with honey and trying to widen our scope a little bit, we actually just keep a 20% honey requirement for the braggot, which is low by traditional standards, but we feel like it is best for the industry and the ability for breweries to be participating on some levels.
Are there any legal definitions anywhere on that with the regulatory people?
Probably not on a braggot. Probably
okay.
not. Most of these, but as a general rule of thumb, and again, there are always exceptions or things that have been modified for certain reasons, but as a general rule of thumb, a mead should have 51% or more fermented honey. And it's key to mention fermented honey versus just honey additions, because mead, by definition, is fermented honey.
Mm-hmm. Now, so if you're attending the festival, would you get the same experience on Friday and Saturday night?
Certainly. Obviously, the ability to know the medal winners on Saturday evening gives you an opportunity to go and try some of the medal winners. We do have, set an allotment back of mead for each night. So, in theory, we could run out of mead on a table on Friday night, but we would have the mead again on Saturday. We don't just kind of keep pouring. So you always have the opportunity to try every mead. Of course, meads will run out over the course of either evening.
Now, the Great American Beer Festival, you get a little 1-ounce cup, and you basically have unlimited sampling. Is that sort of the way that the Mead Festival works as well?
It is. Our Mead Festival is very similar to the Great American Beer Festival. You get a commemorative glassware with the International Mead Festival logo and the year on it. And it's basically a sherry-sized glass, one of those nice little 3-ounce glasses. And then, of course, we have a tick mark down at about a half an ounce. Given that 107 meads at a half an ounce each, if you actually got there, you would be consuming about 2.5 bottles of wine. So we actually do half-ounce pours, though of course you are welcome to try something a second time.
And mead can sneak up on you. So
mead can sneak up on you.
Yeah.
People, I agree, and we of course encourage responsible drinking at all times. We got a great room rate at the Denver Sheraton West, so we actually encourage people to come and stay for the evening, if not, of course, to move themselves around by public transportation or the kindness of a friend. We actually always have a non-drinker where if someone wants to come and they're not going to sample, we'll let them in at no charge, and that way they can get you home safe.
But the best possible world would probably be renting a room, I would think, because then you don't have to, find someone who is either a teetotaler or would be jealous of you as you're enjoying all the meads.
Well, I'm certainly a big fan of just needing to find the elevator at the end of the night.
Yeah. Anyone can drive an elevator.
Right. And we're really excited, for folks who have been with us past years, we've really enjoyed having the event at the Boulder Outlook here in Boulder. But we've actually outgrown it and outgrown a lot of the possibilities for the Boulder area. So we're actually moving the event down to Denver this year, and we're going to be in a Sheraton. Wonderful facility, great looking ballroom, and for people who have been to the event, we've always kind of had the fun of almost hunting the meads down, because the meads were all in different areas of the hotel. This year, we're really proud to be bringing it down to the Sheraton and the facilities they have. We're really taking yet another step up in elegance. Are there any new kind of exotic meads that people should be looking out for this year? Well, they're definitely, it's funny because, we just sent the program to print, and so I've been reading the program a lot for proofreadings and such. And, I know there are meads I want to go try after I've read about them, from some new companies. The two meads coming in from Denmark look very interesting. I know there are going to be a couple different of the Polish meads. But there are other meaderies who have been coming for years who it's like, ooh, that sounds good this year. There's a root beer mead that's being entered. Wow. That sounds really interesting to me. And, all it did, reading the program, all it did was make me thirsty. We probably have about 7 or 8 companies that this will be their first time participating. So it's constantly, changing and new meads being made and such. Are there any chili meads? There's at least one chili mead. The one from South Africa is returning again this year. I hear it's funny because I never actually got a chance to try it last year, but I heard it was really hot. Like you want to do it last, kind of thing. Because everybody kept saying, "Oh yeah, that just destroyed me." But everybody had a fun story about the chili mead. Yeah, well, and the mead makers, a lot of the mead makers will be there. So if our home brewers out there who make mead who want to get some professional tips firsthand, this would be a good opportunity as well. It is, and that's one of the things that's, to me, it's great to have all these meads under one roof to sample, but it's even better the fact that usually about 2/3 of the companies have a representative at the event. In most cases, it's the owner mead maker, which is often the same in our industry, but you really get to talk to the people who are making the mead, as well as, the judging for the home brewers who make it into the final round. It's I think it's pretty cool that we can offer that final round as being judged by some really high-end judges as well as commercial mead makers. And all this for the price tag of? It is $30 in advance, $35 at the door. That gets you unlimited samples up until we think you probably need to be limited. A commemorative glass, a program, and then we also have 2 educational seminars per night, which is included in the cost. So they can always go to meadfest.com and take a look at who we have. But I know we have a beekeeping seminar this year, and honey and mead, coming from a beekeeper's perspective. Ken Schramm, along with Gretchen Bliss from Spruce Mountain Meadery, are doing a food and mead seminar, and then we have a couple others. So it's a lot of great education, great way to meet people, and really just a hell of a lot of fun. Yeah, I envy those who will get a chance to go. I really enjoy the mead, or for the past 2 years have enjoyed the mead tasting that you do in conjunction with the Great American Beer Festival, and the variety of mead with that relatively small tasting is incredible. So it just boggles the mind to think. And that's such a that gathering, as you mentioned, are what we call our Get Back to Your Roots party, because during the beer festival we like to remind the brewers where they came from. But that is a great precursor and showing of what the Mead Festival can be, because every year, the Redstone puts on the Roots Party. We bring meads from the previous year's Mead Festival to really, again, begin to show. The message about mead from the International Mead Association, and what the festival is really about, is celebrate the diversity of mead. Mead is this really wide beverage. Everybody thinks of it as being just a big sweet dessert wine, but mead can be dry or sweet, sparkling or still, high alcohol, low alcohol, and truly run the gamut of taste profiles to let your palate enjoy. And that really is the main message of what the festival is all about, is mead is diverse. Well, that's for sure. Well, I invited you on, number one, to make sure that people know about the Mead Festival, but I also have a selfish motivation as well.
I want to get some free advice, David.
Well, you know me, James. I'm always happy to make up some answers.
Well, you gave me some advice. If people have watched the video podcasts, they kind of saw the evolution of our first mead experiment, where we took essentially a 6-gallon must and then split it up into 6 different batches and flavored 5 of those. And along the way, I was picking up some odd flavors that you assured me would probably go away, and that flavor has. It's dissipated. There was kind of a rubber bandy kind of flavor there for a little while, but now it's gone, and I panicked way too early.
Well, mead, you always just if you're worried about your mead, I suggest forgetting about it for a little while.
Well, the what we've come out with, we used champagne yeast, and I'm blaming myself because I think I put way too much yeast nutrient in there, and what we've wound up with are really dry meads, which are not like anything like I sampled in Denver, and they're interesting, and we enjoy them, but I want to get more of a sweetness. So I want to get away from the champagne yeast, and I wanted to design another mead experiment where we can take another big must and divide it up, and to experiment with different yeast strains to see what kinds of effects each one of those has. So I thought I'd get your input on how to design the experiment and what yeast strains to play with.
Well, and that certainly, really plays in, because I kind of did that when I was starting to work on recipes for Redstone Meadery, and I'll share kind of the tale of what I did, and I probably won't be able to remember all the yeast strains. But one thing, just kind of touching back on the old experiment, because you talked about the champagne yeast, it seemed too dry and looking for others, and I think using different yeasts in meads is important because you get different flavors. But the great thing about mead that I always tell people is, if you don't like what you have, you can change it more than any other fermented beverage. I mean, once you got a beer, that's pretty much it. You got a beer. And whatever's good is good, whatever's bad is bad. But in the case of, say, the meads where, came out much drier than you wanted it, you can always add honey back after post-fermentation, so you can add sweetness back. Or you can always make a sweeter mead and blend them together, or add some fruits in. And, it's one of those, if you don't like what you got, well, do something to it, kind of thing. And this is a real, the home brewer's mentality, which is where I came from, and before going into the commercial world, is if it's too dry, add some honey. If it's too sweet, add some more yeast. If there's a little off flavor, make it a melomel and dump a bunch of fruit in there. You can do. That's the beautiful thing, is you can change meads. It's very common in the commercial mead world, though our company does not do this unless we made a mistake, it's very common in the mead world, is that meaderies will ferment their must down to 0, they'll stabilize it, and then they'll actually add their honey back to the desired sweetness level. So that's actually very common practice in the industry, though our company crashes the product on the way down, and there are certainly other meaderies doing that as well, but we actually crash it where we want it. But we've overshot a little bit, or something went a little long, and we added some honey back.
Now, what do you use to crash the yeast, as you say? What do you recommend?
In our case, because we have commercial equipment, we're literally dropping the tank into the mid-30s. So, at home, if you have a fridge you can throw the carboy in, you throw it in the carboy. As an old home brewer, I basically just let stuff ferment until it killed the yeast, and only once in a while came up with an accidental sparkling mead in the bottles. But I definitely had some accidental sparkling meads in my day, kind of thing. But to the experiment that you specifically doing, which I think is a great way to see how different yeasts give different characteristics, and as I said, these were things that I did early on, is I made up probably 6. I think we did like a 12 or like 15 gallons worth of a must, and then broke it down into probably 2 and 3 gallon containers and added different yeasts. And literally, same kind of that same kind of concept is just 1 gallon or 2 gallons. And back in those days, I probably threw in our nectar products, which is specifically what I was working on at the time, which are the 8% alcohol and carbonated products. I was figuring I would be more likely to use a liquid ale yeast for that production. So I definitely know that we did 1056, just because it's easy. I remember doing the English strain of some 1028. We did. I threw Belgian strong ale yeast in one of them, which was actually one of the most unique ones, because it had a little of that funky Belgian-y thing with then some of the sweetness of the honey, and in this case we were using black raspberries with it as well. I very specifically remember going over to what was then the Association of Brewers and now the Brewers Association, and I have a lot of friends over there, and I was using a lot of them as my test markets. Like, okay, well, what do you all think here? What's taste? And a lot of people there like the Belgian strain one, but we're very clear to be like, yeah, but that's probably not the one you should go to the masses with, because it just it had a little Belgian funk to it. But it was great to see how different yeast strains gave different flavor profiles. What's really funny is in the end of the day, I can't remember which of the liquid ale yeast that I had decided on through that experiment, but when I finally got the commercial operation fired up, I actually did a side-by-side batch of one with liquid ale yeast and one with a dry wine yeast strain called Narbonne. And Narbonne generally is good for young fruity wines. And when I put the two of them running on commercial levels side by side and took them out into my test marketplace, it was actually the dry wine yeast that wound up winning the day. Its performance, its flavor profile, it finished faster. People were more drawn to the flavor than the ale thing. So after all that, I wound up using a dry wine yeast, and that's actually what we use in all of our products, and very common in wineries versus breweries to actually be using dry yeast, where breweries you obviously want to be using liquid yeast.
Now, if we were to use, say, like a Hefeweizen yeast, would we get like banana flavors?
I would imagine you'd probably get some of the bananas and cloves and all that. And this is the beautiful thing, and what I really encourage your listeners and what you're doing on the projects is that it's a lot of fun to make a 5-gallon batch, break it off into gallons, and throw different yeast strains in every one. And I always liked, as a home brewer, I used to do combinations. Like, I'd rarely do all champagne. But if I was making a 5-gallon batch and I was using just 3 of those 5-gram little packets of yeast, I would often do like 2 champagne and 1 sherry, or a sherry and 2 Montrachets, and I would do things like that. But I'm like that.
So then you need a spreadsheet or something to keep track of all the different combinations.
Or just drink it. Either or. I mean, you have your way, I have mine, but...
Relax, don't worry, have some mead.
Exactly. And once you have the mead, don't worry, the relax and not worrying is going to come along just fine.
Standard equipment. Now, I want to talk to you a little bit more about your the method of sweetening, because I think that in our video podcast we wanted to make sure that the fermentation was stopped before we added more sugar. And my brain is locking up. I think we used potassium sorbate.
That is probably most likely what you're using. It's a very common yeast stabilizer.
And it does. And I've read and been told that it doesn't actually kill the yeast, but it just stops the reproduction.
Right. And my experience is you need to be fermented down a fair amount, like at least somewhere in the 1010s to probably 1020. Like if you had a fermenting mead and it was still at like 1030 and you really wanted a very, very sweet mead, I don't think potassium sorbate is going to necessarily it's not going to knock it out. But once our experience is once it's fermented down to lower gravities and then we've crashed it, the addition of the potassium sorbate then keeps it from re-fermenting. And it is important. When I first got started, because I was just an old home brewer, and as I said, I just usually would let them go until they just completely stopped, and then I would bottle them or transfer them or do whatever I was going to do. And when I got onto the commercial side of it all, the first day that I transferred my crashed honey wine over to add the fruit purees, I pumped it over and it was sealed up, and I came in the next morning, and I was like, maybe it got a little pressure during the pump up. I should see if the valve needs to be bled off at all. Of course, I opened the valve, and I heard, and it was like, oh, hail. And I opened it again, and it went, and I was like, I think that sucker is fermenting in there. And I spent the next 10 days learning a lot about yeast stabilization. And, talking to the folks out at Lalamand and reading some articles, and it's like, oh, I can't do that there. I got to do it differently. And I always say that my system was always my basement come alive, but I would go forward, and then I would run into some brick wall that didn't work in the commercial level, and I would climb over it or dig under it or get around it or break through it or whatever, and then go forward until we hit the next wall. Then got over it, went under it, chewed through it, and eventually, we wound up with what is our Redstone system.
So on a homebrew scale, if you want a sweet mead and you don't want to mess with stabilizers, just keep adding honey until the yeast gives up the ghost and doesn't ferment anymore.
Yeah, basically, I think that winds up working. I mean, I think to get a really nice sweet mead, you start with a lot of honey. Yeah, and you start big, and that way, when the yeast finally peters out, you still, you have your alcohol strength, but you still have a really sweet mead because you started so big to begin with.
What kind of original gravity are we talking about?
I mean, if you want a truly sweet mead, I mean, 1120, 1140. I think our reserves start at 11, which is our really classic big sweet port-style mead, though we age it often 2 to 3 years before it even gets into bottles.
Very tasty
I think our starting
stuff.
gravity is like in the 1160s on that.
Wow.
And our Grand Reserve, which hopefully one day, when finished, will be the highest alcohol mead ever produced by fermentation only in humankind. I think we are in the 12s.
Well,
it's a whole other world.
Yeah, that's a lot of honey.
That's a lot of honey, yes. The Grand Reserve was a lot of buckets.
Well, we've gotten some honey given to us by a listener in Little Rock, David, who's also named David, and it's a watermelon honey.
Fun.
So we want to we wanted to preserve, a lot of that flavor with this second mead experiment. So I hope that and just name some. So you say play with ale yeasts. Are there specific wine yeasts that you would recommend?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I would, if I did the experimentation, I would probably try to do half ale yeast and half wine yeast. That way, you really get a really wide flavor. But Montrachet, you can try sherry yeasts. Certainly, there are any number of red wine and white wine yeast, depending what you're making. I'd probably do more like more of a white wine type yeast. So, I would look into maybe a Chablis yeast or a Chardonnay, and maybe even try to do like one, on the wine side, one white wine yeast, one red wine yeast, and one, what kind of crazy yeast can we find that's a wine yeast? And then maybe on the ale side, I always like 1028 as a yeast anyway, but I like English ales, kind of thing. But maybe a 1028, a 1056, and something Belgian.
Yeah.
That way, try the Hefeweizen. That'd be a great one. Maybe to try in there, and we see what kind of different flavors. I mean, we all remember the old line at the homebrew shop was, all depends what you want. You can make anything taste like, it depends what you like. And that's what I always heard. I started homebrewing in the late 80s with an old-timer selling the stuff out of the back of his house and stuff, and the answer from Colonel John was always the same. Well, it all depends what you like. You can put, that kind of thing. And it's like, thanks, Colonel. And the funny thing is where that seems so, when you're trying to learn, it's like, this is not helping. Mm-hmm. And now, that was like 1989 for me doing stuff like that and talking to the Colonel. And, here it is 2006, and I discovered most of the answers to most of the questions is, it all depends what you like. You can kind of do whatever. So, what seemed not helpful when I was starting turned out to be, a lot of wisdom.
Yeah, when you're getting started, you want someone to tell you step by step what to do.
Exactly, and the Colonel's attitude was, no, you should make stuff you like.
And sometimes making mistakes is the best learning that you can do.
Absolutely.
Well, David, I appreciate your advice again.
Well, hopefully it'll work well. We appreciate you giving us some airtime to talk about the International Mead Festival. We're very excited. We're dotting the I's and crossing the T's and putting all the pieces together over these last few weeks, and we're just really excited. We have people coming from all over the country with our ticket sales, and as we said, meadfest.com gets you all the information you need to know. You can also buy tickets online through that website as well. Excellent. Good luck with it. Thanks, James. Well, thanks again to David Myers for taking the time out to talk to us. David he's pretty much the embodiment of the entrepreneurial homebrewing spirit, in my opinion. It's always fun to talk to David. Once again, go to meadfest.com, meadfest.com, to get more information on the International Mead Festival. And if you see David, tell him you heard him talk about it on this show. You might see Brian Warren wandering around there with a microphone and mayhaps a kilt. And Brian's going to get all mad at me for talking about his kilt. And also, next week, by the way, we take a tour of Redstone Meadery on the next episode of Basic Brewing Video. So you'll have to watch out for that. You can see how David brews or makes his mead right there in his meadery. And we still have a handful of the 2007 Brewers Logbooks on hand. And thanks very much to everybody who has sent in suggestions on how we can tweak it for next time. It looks like Steve did a pretty good job of laying it out this time because the tweaks that we're getting are overall, they're pretty minor, but helpful. So you can check out the Brewers Logbook on basicbrewing.com. If you have brewing questions, show suggestions, or just want to say howdy, write to james@basicbrewing.com or just fill out the contact form on basicbrewing.com. And please don't forget to tell us where you're from. And while you're on our site, you can check out our online shop where you can find great pricing on our DVDs and a combo deal to save you even more on both of them together. In our first DVD, Basic Brewing Introduction to Extract Home Brewing, we walk you through the extract brewing process step by step, all the way from boiling to bottling. And in Basic Brewing Stepping into All Grain, we take you through the all grain process from milling your grain to collecting your wort. And you can see a fine listing of the fine folks across the fine country who sell our fine DVDs on basicbrewing.com. And if there isn't a vendor in your area, you can order it online. And thanks to everybody who's continued to click on our Amazon.com link. We appreciate the support. Our featured products this week that were purchased through the link are the Garmin GPS 10 Bluetooth-enabled wireless GPS with mount and software, and That's Not My Train, Usborne Touchy-Feely Board Books. Of course, there are always tons of beer-related books and such, but, they're just not as much fun to mention as, touchy-feely board books, GPS, Bluetooth-enabled wireless stuff. Thanks again, everybody, for doing that. And remember, I can't tell who bought what, so, no worries. You could buy naughty stuff, and I'd never know. And that'd be fun. That'd be fun to talk about. Okay, enough. That's all until next week. Until then, thanks for listening. I'm James Spencer. Production help for Basic Brewing Radio and our website is provided by Kelly Dodson, our man in Austin, who also did our logo. Basic Brewing Radio is a production of Active Voicing. We'll talk to you next time, everybody. I've got to go try not to scratch. So long.